Okay. Okay. Yes. All right. Calling the meeting to order. It is 6:32. Welcome to the June 17th, 2024 meeting of the Library Commission. This is a hybrid meeting with commissioners, city staff, and members of the public participating in person at the Menlo Park Library in accordance with public health guidelines for in-person meetings and the public participating remotely. I'd like to start with taking a roll call. On my list is Alan Cohen, but I believe he's resigned and will be hopefully filling his position soon. Michael Herrick.
Here.
David Pollack.
Here.
Scott Schaefer.
Here.
Brian Westcott.
Here.
Jennifer Wise. Here. And I am Carol Orden, the chair. Staff present include Library and Community Services Director Sean Reinhardt and Management Analyst Ashley Walker is subbing in for Nick Shegda, who's out sick. All right. Ashley's going to be helping facilitate the meeting. Ashley, could you please take a moment and provide instructions to the commission and members of the public in attendance on how the meeting will proceed?
Yes, thank you, Chair. For members of the public who are attending this meeting virtually and wish to provide public comment after the chair calls for public comment on the item you wish to speak on, please engage the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. For those who are calling in from a landline or cell phone, please press *9 to raise your virtual hand. Members of the public attending remotely who wish to speak, please take a moment to make sure your first and last name are updated on Zoom, or you may provide your name and the spelling as you're called to speak. Public comment will be heard in the order received and is limited to 3 minutes in length. For members of the public attending in person, there are speaker cards available on the table. Please complete one and turn it in to myself or another staff member before public comment is called for the item you wish to speak on. If there are a large number of public commenters, the time limit may be adjusted by the chair in order to allow everyone a chance to comment. When your turn for online public comment has arrived, staff will unmute you. And with that, I'll return the meeting to the chair.
Thank you, Ashley. Before we proceed to public comment, since we have so many new commissioners and I as chair and Jennifer as vice chair have 1 year of service on the committee, it seemed that this would be a good opportunity to go around the table, introduce ourselves, give a little bit of background on who we are and why we have asked to participate in the Library Commission, and if there are any goals or hopes that you have while you're serving with the commission. So I'll kick us off. Again, my name is Carol Orton. I have lived in Menlo Park for a little over 30 years. My professional background is as a lawyer, off and on for 20 or so years, interspersed with time raising kids and being heavily involved in our Menlo Park community. I was super involved in the Menlo Park Atherton Education Foundation, the PTAs at the 3 schools in Menlo Park. My children attended Oak Knoll Elementary, which is around the corner from where we live in District 5, West Menlo Park, Hillview Middle School, and Menlo Atherton High School. So very involved at all levels. I participated in campaigns to raise parcel taxes for our school district, the bond campaign that resulted in the renovation of all the campuses in the Menlo Park City School District. And I served on the Menlo Park City School District Board of Trustees for 4 years. And then back to my professional life and a small business owner went until I retired in 2020. And once the pandemic lifted, I looked around and thought, time to get back to work in our community. So lifelong love of reading. I've been volunteering for the past 2 years at a library at a school in East Palo Alto that's under the umbrella of the Ravenswood School District. And I saw that there was an opening and applied to be on the Library Commission, just sort of seemed like a good way to bookend my time in Menlo Park. So my goals and interests in the committee, on the commission are I think threefold. One is I've strong interest in seeing that there's a robust and healthy programming at the new Bellhaven community campus. And I would like to provide whatever support and cheerleading to the hardworking staff for all that they have done and will do there. Secondly, I'd like to make sure that we take a look at this concept of lifelong learning and make sure that each of our libraries provide programming and support and activities for different age groups and affinity groups in our community. And lastly, I'm very interested, after taking a behind the scenes tour of our library with Nick and Michael, in exploring what the plan is and making sure that we get on a path to update this library in whatever way it can be updated, whether it's, I know it's not a short-term thing, but considering how long it takes to get things done in city government, I would like us to make sure that we're on that and stay visible and advocating and helping where needed to get this library up to the 21st or 22nd century. So that's me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Wise. I've also been on the commission a year now. I've lived in Menlo Park 4 years, but I am originally from this area, so I'm really familiar with it. Let's see, so my background, I actually have a background in education policy, including at the federal level, and then also director of preschool. And then after that, I went and also became an attorney. So I've been working as an attorney for the last 4 years, doing tax and estate planning. And I originally joined the library commission because I'm just such an avid user of the library. I just wanted to be able to give back. And this has been a wonderful way to do it. And it's been so meaningful to be able to have a very small part in the opening of the new community center. And then moving forward, I have similar goals. I think our staff are so hardworking. I want to be able to support them in any way we can, especially with, opening the new center and making sure we have great programs. I'm so proud of the programs this library has, especially for youth. They seem to be very well attended and very well liked. So I want to make sure that continues. And then I'm trying to get a tour on the calendar so I can take a look at the library because I've heard multiple people say the same thing. So lots of good things to come and I'm very excited to be here. Michael?
Yeah, I'm Michael Herrick. I've been a resident of Menlo Park for about 4 years. I moved to California to take a job for only 1 year at the Hoover Institution Library and Archives on Stanford's campus about 9.5 years ago. And I resigned from Stanford and took a job at San Francisco State. I think that job is that and my son's involvement in the Menlo Children's Center, and he's now in TK and Encinal. So I'm sort of just beginning the trek that Carol talked about in terms of family life. But because I've been a professional librarian for about 3 decades now, mostly in technical services, supporting sort of the back end of when Carol and I went down to the basement and there were these people working in cubicles, that's sort of been my domain for the last 3 decades. But this half of the peninsula is sort of a feeder for San Francisco State, I think. And I realized this is also part of the peninsula-wide sort of library system in San Mateo County. And I sort of have an interest in looking at, it's sort of Nick, when he led me and Carol on a tour, it was sort of a double-edged sword in terms of, yes, you're part of a larger consortium, but there are also like sort of costs and things you're locked into as part of that consortium. So I think that's one of the areas which I think I can probably lend some sort of advice and sounding board for library staff long-term. I also have a little bit of experience in ESL programs and whatnot. So I think in terms of lifelong learning and just sort of looking across the district, what are the needs, especially going over the Ravenwood School District. And yeah, I guess I just have always loved libraries and it's sort of a natural service commitment that I can.
Well, I compete with these introductions, that I'll give it a try. Name is David Pollock. I'm a rather recent resident of Menlo Park for about a year, but I've lived in the area for 24, 25 years now, making me feel really old. But I've just always been passionate about the libraries and its role in my children's lives. It's not just about giving them a thirst for learning and aspiring, to new perspectives on the world around them, but it's also the center of community building. So it's not just books and reading and taking books out of the library, but it's the programs, it's how it outreach to the community and how it brings the community together is something really exciting to me, especially the additional challenge or opportunity in Menlo Park is that there's sort of two sides of town with two different perspectives and cultures and backgrounds, and the opportunity to use the library system now with the new campus to introduce the other side of town to this side of town and bring the two sides of town together is really exciting. I'm also a bit passionate about bicycling and walking, trying to stay out of my car as much as possible. And I'm excited that the library does so much around, bike to the library day and working with the Safe Routes to School folks. So I'm really excited to do more in that area. Right. Thank you.
Yes, Brian Westcott. Boy, I am feeling old. I've been here over 35 years and counting. Yeah, I really enjoyed Menlo Park as a city, raised my family here. Actually have a company that's headquartered here. I had a long love of libraries in my academic career as well as professional. And I think, the Menlo Park Library does serve as a focal point for the community. And some of the things I'm interested in is keeping it current. I think the challenge for libraries is in the digital age, how to be a place that's still the focal point for the community and learning and knowledge. And, but I think we're well positioned and I, would like to be part of this commission. I've been on the Finance and Audit Committee for 4 years before this, so I like to stay involved in the community. And I really think the library should thrive, and I think this is a great committee to see that happen.
I'm Scott Schaefer. I've born and raised in Menlo Park, so been here for my entire life, and admittedly not that long. Went to school out of state and just came back about 1.5 years ago, back home, and am currently pursuing my master's degree in library science. So since I'm going to be here for the foreseeable future, I wanted to find some way to get sort of re-involved with the community. And also I'm very interested in public libraries as both social and civic spaces and the intersection between the libraries and local politics. And so having the opportunity to serve on the commission and in some way both participate and give back to my community in some way was a very exciting opportunity. And yes, you all much more articulate about the specific parts you were interested in, but I'm just beginning to explore which aspect of the library I find most fascinating. So I'm looking forward to that opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate that. So now, we're in the public comment section. Under this section, the public may address the commission on any subject that's not listed on the agenda. Each speaker may address the commission once under public comment for a limit of 3 minutes. You're not required to provide your name or city of residence, but it is helpful. The commission cannot act on items not listed on the agenda. Therefore, the commission cannot respond to non-agenda issues brought up under public comment, other than to provide general information. Do we have any public comment on items not appearing on the agenda?
At this time, if you'd like to make public comment, please notify the staff liaison by using the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're dialing in, you can use *9 to engage the raise hand function. There are no commenters.
All right. So now we can move to section D, our study session on the annual work plan for 24-25. We're beginning with D1, a study session on preparing updates to the Library Commission annual work plan for 24-25. Ashley, do we have any public comment on this item?
At this time, if you'd like to make public comment, please notify staff by using the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're dialing in, you can use *9 to engage the raise hand function. We didn't have any.
Did you want to make any comments on
I'd be happy
to
to maybe
kick
kick off
us off?
discussion. As noted in the staff report, the city council asks all of the advisory bodies to annually submit a work plan. So it's that time of year again for the library commission to begin work on the work plan. You may have noticed that later on in the agenda, the tentative agenda schedule includes kind of 3 opportunities to kind of refine the work plan. Tonight's the first of those 3 months for a study session, just to talk about the current work plan and potential changes to the next one. Next month in July, you're tentatively scheduled to talk about a report out to the city council of the past year's activity, which also is an opportunity to talk about next year's work plan. And then in August, the proposal is for the commission to have kind of finalized the work plan and actually make a formal recommendation to take it to city council by the end of September is the due date that the city council requests the work plans to be turned in. So included in the packet is the current work plan, and I've actually put it on the screen here. If that's a helpful device for you all during the discussion, if you want to make edits straight to it, and we can type it on the screen or any other way that you want to do it. The current work plan has 10 goals on it. I won't read them all here. They're all available for you all. And then with that, I think I'll turn it back to Chair Orton and all can decide how you would like to proceed from here.
So I have written some notes myself, but I don't want to take over. I want to hear from you and we could just sort of start the discussion. Any reactions to edits or reordering or additions that we might want to make to using the last year's work plan as sort of the template that we're going to edit off of. Anybody have
Just
thoughts
a-
they want to kick
just
off?
More of a question of order. So what's the thought of like reviewing this together or, I mean, because we're looking at this, we're giving feedback, but then there's a separate session where we really dive into the plan for next year? Is that, I'm just not clear on sort of the order.
You
of
want to
activities.
respond to that?
Certainly,
Both
so
can.
I think you could dive in as deeply as you wish this evening. I was just referencing that there's also a couple other touch points over the next 2 months.
Mhm.
So it's not that you have to come out with a completed, updated work plan tonight. But I think
Mhm.
typically in a process like this, getting some big ideas on the table. And one idea could be work plan looks good, carry it forward. Typically, there's some changes that occur. But I would say it's really, a study session is structured to just be an open discussion.
So I would say that we'll start, I mean, I can, if you want, I can kick it off and give you some comments that I made on the work plan from last year, just as a discussion point, not,
Sure.
just to get the ball rolling and then everybody can chime in, agree or disagree. But one thing I went back and looked at what our mission is from the city council. And the 6 bullet points they have for what our mission is to advise the city council on matters relating to maintenance and operation of the libraries and the library systems, focusing on the scope and degree of library activities, maintenance and protection of libraries, evaluation and improvement of library acquisition of library materials, coordination with other library systems, literacy and ESL programs. That's what's in the city council adopted policy that was attached in your materials. And if you go through and look at the list, I think that for sure, we want to reorder a few things. You know, the last couple, we were in a pandemic and then coming out of a pandemic, so I don't know that the item related to focusing on how to handle emergencies is as top of the list or even needs to be on the list at this point. I assume those plans are in place in library policy, so I don't know that it needs to be part of our work plan. To me, one of the top priorities should be with a little bit of revision of the language, because we're now calling it the Belhaven Community Campus, is to support and monitor program development and operation of the Belhaven Community Campus. So I would put that as one of our top priorities. And then I would like to see us take a look at what all the programs are that we're offering and whether there are any gaps that we need to fill that address other age groups or affinity groups, and whether we're meeting those needs. And then on the one related to advising staff on the advancement of overall library system improvements, I would like to see us add to that, analyzing and evaluating whether and how capital improvements to this library could be addressed. So those are some of my primary ones. I mean, I've got a few other little nitpicks, but so again, a little reordering of priorities in the list, and maybe removing a couple things that don't seem as
I
pertinent.
have a more, maybe just a general dumb question. So there's the Belhaven campus, there's here. What's the division of responsibility in terms of advisory roles or oversight of this commission versus Parks and Recs in terms of the various programs? Because it's not just the library there, it's adult education, it's youth education, it's community outreach and services in general. It's a park, it's recreation. So what role does, say, Parks and Rec have with that campus, and where is our responsibility and where is there maybe joint responsibility?
I think that's an excellent question.
Well, certainly each commission has its own kind of specific charge. The library commission in the name,
Yes.
to advise the city council on library services in particular. But I would, it's not necessarily limited to only library and nothing that crosses over to, like, at the Belhaven Community Campus, for example. There's a senior center. The seniors definitely use the library. They want access to those resources. There's opportunities for crossover there. There's a youth center. It's like an after-school program for school-age kids. They come and use the library after school. So the library is operated by the library, and that's like formally under the purview of the Library Commission's advisory role. However, there's these opportunities to provide, a really holistic experience to community members that entails, working with, other departments in the city. If this happens to be in the same department, but, just you can expand the sort of concept from there. Anything that sort of passes through the library, that the library has a role in lifting up and serving the community, it's reasonably within the library's purview. The Parks and Recreation Commission is, like in the name, parks and recreation. More those kind of activities is specifically within their purview, but similarly, as I just mentioned, a few of those examples, there's elements that cross over with the Library Commission's mission and role. Now, the new facility, Belhaven Community Campus, is physically, one edifice that has a number of these functions like co-located within them. And in particular, that's where the two commissions have been meeting jointly because the operations are so tightly interwoven. There's a lot of synergy there. It only makes sense for the commissions to be in the same room periodically. So you're having kind of the one conversation instead of, sort of adding something back and forth and never really, kind of as a group, like looking at the whole picture.
I have a follow-up question.
Mhm.
Where does the childcare program fit? Under which commission is primarily responsible for reviewing and giving advice on the childcare?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really there is no specific like a line item charge in either commission for like advising on the city's childcare programs. I think if one could potentially put them in one bucket or the other. My take is that in particular, the preschool, which is really kind of a formal educational,
Mhm,
it's early childhood education.
mhm.
But I would also extend that to the after-school program because it's, it's out of school time, educational activities. Education kind of seems a little more library
Yeah.
adjacent than it does to, say, the recreation and gym. Nothing against one or for one or the other, but just like where does the sort of the mission, the desired outcomes of the program lie, and it does seem a little closer to the library.
Given that, I think there should be something added to our
Mhm.
work plan that includes the fact that childcare is under our purview as being part of the lifelong learning and those programs.
Isn't Nick responsible for the?
Well, Nick and I had
Mhm.
talked about this and I'd asked him
Oh.
and he had said, well, it's, part of lifelong learning and it is. And then I did also meet with our city council liaison, Jen Mollison. And she asked me the question, which one of you commissions has anyway, so I just think like it would be good to clarify that.
Mhm.
Just so we don't leave that out of our planning. Michael?
Yeah, I sort of agree in terms of last year's work plan goals, if we're sort of starting from that point to look at, how do we start there? And I agree with everything you said, Carol, in terms of sort of bumping up certain things or priority. And I do want to look at number 10, because we don't have budgetary responsibility or really in any sense on this commission, but Jen's my local district counselor, and I just want her most recent newsletter, which I guess she's leaving this year, but she's saying, by the way, in the coming years, we're gonna start having some fiscal problems and actually start making hard decisions. And so I think the fact that we have down there number 10, annually review, as opposed to just sort of spot things that might be problematic, I think we as a commission could in this coming year, be looking at the overall programming and just really getting a better sense of the total sort of cost flows and everything, not to make budget decisions in any way, but to really educate ourselves if there are going to be hard decisions made by the council over the coming 2 to 5 years, to at least help contribute some knowledge to that. Because I don't know, is it the finance and audit committee that just comes up with sort of a spreadsheet and starts to cut here and there? And I think we should really educate ourselves this coming year to know what really, even though I don't think it's we're on the hook to make the budget balance. I do think we have, looking at these goals, I would bump up number 10 based on the fact that it sounds like we're gonna have some budget tightness potentially.
Some things, yeah, and I think maybe a combination of two of these things, and maybe this exists, but I was looking around, I don't think the library's changed that much in 25 years since my kids were here. And has anybody thought about maybe looking at the library of the future, where people want this library to be in, 5 years, 10 years? And then, I think we have a lot of expertise in library science here, and if we set that as a goal and, maybe benchmark against what other communities are doing, even in other states, maybe survey or take a survey of the community, who uses this library? Are people aware of what services and what would bring them in and what would they want? And, I think if we had that overall just goal to try to define what the library of the future might look like for Menlo Park, which, you know, and I know Menlo Park has its own specific issues, but it's, you know, a great community, and I think something like that would be helpful. And then maybe, I think following up on that, it would help define what capital improvements or what capital we might need to support that. So you know, it's a little bit detailed work plan, but I think we have our work idea,
Mhm.
but I think we have the people that could do it.
Were future goals for the library included in the survey that was sent out about the Bellhaven Community Center a few months ago, or no? Do you remember?
To some extent, I mean, it was really asking people what type of programs would they like to see in the new facility. There was a separate survey just about the type of books that people would want to see in the new facility. So, I mean, that's a good point, and some of that work had been done, although it was really kind of geared toward informing the new facility and not this sort of larger concept.
Yeah,
Mhm.
You know, and I think we could engage even the companies, the businesses, and potentially get a source of, capital. You know, if we got them involved too. So,
how many years ago was it when the Arriaga plans were, there was a donation that ended up getting scrapped, and but it went along pretty far. I mean, I think there were plans and there were tours of other libraries in Northern California, or, you know, in the Bay Area, and there was a lot of discussion, but
This was in about 2017, 2018.
yeah, not that, you know, we would need to use that, but
well, I was gonna say, your library studies, and there must be a lot written on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for me because I, when I came on this commission, I did talk to General Wilson a little bit about, you know, the history. And I heard about the Arriaga thing, and I heard this sort of, at least from her perspective, the story. And I'm sure every Menlo Park community member has a different story, like where it went wrong, and or where it just sort of didn't happen. But I'm wondering also about not just looking out broadly at the profession in terms of like where our library's headed, like people talk about digital and everything else, what can we really do at the local level. And also, you know, I just sort of saw that and I just got in the paper mail today because I live close enough to the SRI campus that there's gonna be a total change.
Right.
Just walkable down the street between the train station and here. So I'm sort of wondering, even there's nationally, but also locally, if we should ask the council, you know, as we go this year, to say, what's the strategic, if we're supposed to be looking at strategic planning, look at the programming, look at where libraries are going, but also look at just the physical, this building, instead of going back to Arriaga all the time, look at like,
yeah,
what's,
because he's not.
but I think
But,
that's,
but that could be, yeah, all part of it, but you know, if we have a target.
Yep.
Something big, we can tie all these to it, and then, of course, you're not gonna get all the money you need, but you never know, you could go to Facebook and say, here, write us a check.
Yeah.
Every other opportunity. in
Even
Menlo
there
Park.
was a significant contribution from Menlo Park. It didn't all come from Meta.
Yeah.
For with Bellhaven.
Yeah, the city did kick in a fair amount of funding through Measure T bond, it's a recreation bond, and a couple of other sources. But Meta did provide
Yeah,
the bulk.
the bulk.
of
Yeah, and
The thing is, there are a lot, there's SRI, there's the.
there's Sand Hill
Willow,
Road.
the.
I could go walk Sand Hill Road,
Yeah,
door
yeah.
to door, you'd be, but I think we need
But you need to have
something
a
to show,
plan and a
we gotta
vision.
show them something exciting.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and why we're gonna be the library of the future for a community that's in the center of
Yeah.
technology.
Well, and the other thing that I'm not totally up on is what the long-term or short-term capital plans are for the childcare center that's here, and the city council chambers, and the police department, and all that, you know, because it could be that everything gets wrapped into
Mhm.
something similar to Bellhaven, and they've already redone the gyms and whatever, but
Cause I wanna,
Probably the oldest, but-
just throw out the concept of library as a physical building as versus the role of the library in the future of community building, and it can be either or both, you know, is it a physical building? Like in San Carlos, where I spent many years, you know, there was nonprofit offices, you know, in the same building. There were, you know, community conference rooms, you know, on the second floor, so that, you know, all of the local, you know, community groups, they could all have their meetings, and different events happened in the library. You know, so there's a lot to think about in terms of the physical location, but also the role that the library plays in the future. And while I have the floor, just another thought is that it can be whatever we want it to be in the future, like, technically speaking, the school day ends at, you know, 3 o'clock or whenever, and an after-school program is in many cities the domain of Parks and Recs, because it's a family service. It's not paid for by the school district. It's paid for by the city in many cases. Okay, well, it's an educational program, so we'll give out the you know, like free or cheaper rent on the facilities. But if the city can kick in some money, so there's a lot of opportunity, I think, moving forward in terms of you know, not only after school programs, but sort of how we collaborate, you know, with the school districts, and what the role is, what the roles are with the school district, with Parks and Recs, with other, you know, with various departments in the city, et cetera, for us to help define what that future looks like.
We can talk about this more in detail when we get to the library affiliates point in the agenda, but it sounds like one thing that might be worth talking about in the context of the work plan is this idea of trying to build connections between the library and other local institutions, whether that's companies or this trying to push it as like infrastructure in the city council. It might be worth, it might be worth considering some point about that when we talk about putting something in the work plan about trying to foster a broader community network built around the library.
Weigh in with a few comments. Sounds like there was all really
Yeah.
great points. Everyone got something out on the table. Oh, I'm not sure.
Oh,
Did you-
I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, so a few things, maybe we can kind of bring it back to often a good starting point is like the existing plan, and if some of this either is kind of already there, it needs to be tweaked or added, sometimes that's not helpful to sort of structure. So maybe we could just sort of go sort of just through the list here and touch on a couple of things. I'll note, I think we already talked about item 10. I think we heard some potential tweaks to that one, and maybe really focusing on like this potential impacts to services being like, and just bringing that out as like that would be kind of the focus for that sort of knowledge about how the budget sort of supports the library's programs and services, and less like the annual review, but more about like make sure that, you know, you have the information to evaluate potential impacts is what I kind of heard.
Yeah, and I think with number 9, everybody's starting to think strategically here and long-term. And so I think combine the wording in that, not so much to like look at the coming year specifically, but really, I think what we were saying about, you know, just sort of what's the money capacity in this community to support educational growth in
Right.
the future.
And I also think the budget is gonna be influenced by how exciting, you know, the library could be. The budget for this library right now is not, you know, is probably not gonna change that much. Right,
For the operations,
yes,
I mean, it really depends what the city's like financial position is year over year. But right now, we're sort of in a kind of stable status quo. But we did have a bit of an expansion, just because to operate the new facility.
right, sure.
But from the capital perspective, that's a whole other, and I heard a lot of discussion about the capital side. This facility in particular, as Chair Orton mentioned, there was a fairly serious effort about, it's been about 7, 8 years now ago to rebuild this facility.
Yes.
That didn't come to pass. The focus turned to Bellhaven, which I think rightly so. That was part of the reason why this didn't come to pass, because Bellhaven kind of needed it more. But there was a lot of study that was done at the time. There actually was a space needs study done for this facility back in 2017 or so. So it might be good to just sort of bring that back next month, just to kind of put it back in front of folks. So you have that as a reference. We also did a space needs study for the Bellhaven Library, which ultimately did inform the new facility. For a moment in time, the effort was really on rebuilding a new library there, and that ultimately metastasized into what we now have as the Bellhaven Community Campus, which is a great thing. I also want to note that in number 9 here, there already exists a goal to review and advise on the department's strategic plan. So that touched on a few things I think I heard earlier about where's this library going? What are some of the things that we've kind of identified that need to be happening in the future?
Is there a strategic plan that's more recent than the 2021 version that's on the website?
I believe that we need to update it because I believe the Library Commission recommended the strategic plan in April, if I'm
I
not
was trying to
mistaken.
find it, yeah.
Yeah, but the Parks and Recreation Commission, they were unable to achieve a quorum in April. So they didn't get a chance to also recommend it, and that's on their agenda next week.
Okay,
So we were just waiting to have both commissions sort of weigh in on that update and
Yeah.
kind of finalize that. So that does exist, and it
Yeah.
has been updated this
I
year.
remember we talked about it at one point. but
Yeah, it was
I
either,
couldn't find it.
I might be thinking, it might have been
It was
March, it was
spring.
either March or April of this year that this commission looked at it, but we could bring that back, especially if the Parks and Rec Commission kind of completes their review this month. I'll also just note, and it's not up here elsewhere, but maybe it's here in number 9 somewhere, is the city's capital improvement plan. So there's a pretty robust
Mhm.
capital improvement plan for all of the city's facilities, whether it's efforts to build a new facility or if it's just like the every year kind of maintenance schedules and renovation schedules for the different facilities. So we can kind of, if
I
not,
don't think the library
bake
is
it in here.
included. There's no, it's not part of any capital improvement plan, maybe maintenance. I know there's gonna be a new roof, but
new roof was on the capital improvement plan, and that's actually happening later this year, a new roof for this facility. And there's electrification is something that's coming up for all of the city's buildings as part of the climate action plan. I'm not sure where this building is in that scheme, but it's supposed to all be done by 2030, which is kind of creeping up on us, actually. Just to get rid of all the gas fired, like heating systems and whatnot. So there are kind of like those improvements that are sort of on the horizon. So we could give a summary of like which ones are like relevant here.
Yeah.
So that you can kind of understand what are some of those smaller scale projects and how would a larger scale project fit in.
okay. So we checked off 9 and 10. We definitely want to maybe add a little language, as Michael was.
And I'd say 6 from what Brian has sort of been saying, but we're sort of mixing
Yeah.
capital and ongoing, but I think we could bring together somehow 6, 9, and
Yeah.
10 into a high, like you just sort of said, the Bellhaven Community Campus is high already, it's 2, we're bumping up to 1, but maybe 2 for next year is some goal that really, instead of monitor, I think Brian, that not envision, or at least, really
Right.
future thinking. As a goal for next year specifically, that could lead on to.
Yeah, I agree. I think we could combine a few of these and have basically library of the future. Do some, look at past information. It sounds like there might be some studies. We all should come up to speed on
Yeah.
what they've looked at. Do some outward looking, talk to the residents about what they see, come up with some ideas. Which, I think is one of those, and then, also look at capital improvements. And then, you know, you're not gonna get everything you want, so some things might, but I think if we think big, you know, it's always more exciting
Mhm.
for people. You don't get money unless you ask, and you gotta have a reason to ask, so. You know, but
Yeah.
it's okay to be turned down, but
And there's different levels of capital
Yeah.
improvements, right? There's like an all new facility, which would maybe be like the
Mhm.
top. But then there's also, you know, like substantial renovations, right? Or, you know, altering or adding on. I don't know if adding on this building, I don't know if that's really feasible, but something like a renovation is certainly an option. So that would all be, you
Yeah.
know, part of a more extended kind of study and
I highly
conversation that would need
recommend.
to happen.
Yeah, highly recommend you take the backstage tour.
yeah. But you know, if you start with this and then it's gonna come down.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
but.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be exciting to.
So then another, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I don't wanna negate what Brian is saying, and I don't wanna just like put it all in the bucket that I'm discussing, but I think it's kind of between the role of the physical library in the future with the technology and how people access information. But as much as the role of the library in the life of the community and the building of life of the community. Because it's not just about books, it's about lifetime learning, whether it could be, I'm not the target audience, but I don't know, classes on, you know, pickleball or something that's a educational activity, which is recreational, or one of the community bike rides that Nick and I are trying to you know, tee up with the safe routes to school people. It's kind of what is the role of the library physically and the services, because one's, I don't know, just random spitballing is that maybe this part of the library is just sort of partitioned out or rebuilt in a way that it makes it a more accessible community meeting place. If that's a need in the community to have more, you know, community nonprofit or groups or organizations that are looking for a place to meet, then, and this part of the library isn't getting a lot of use, then maybe redesign it so that it is more accessible, or not a meeting place, but a other type of place that provides a service that is needed in the community, and partition it off for that, maybe a dojo for, I don't know, martial arts or something, whatever that might be. Maybe this, you know, facility could be made into that. But again, it stems from what's the role of the library in the community, as opposed to, you know, just like digital library collection and how people access the information.
Right, and so that would be part of the library of the future, right? We'd have
Okay,
to,
yeah.
yeah, we'd have to envision, because,
I think you're saying two sides of the same.
Okay, yeah, and
Yeah.
because you might not need as much physical space for
Right.
books. Or different
Yeah.
way to store books, so they're, you know, you request them and they pull them out, I don't know, I'm not a.
you gotta take the back room tour.
Yeah, yeah, like, maybe.
Well, this has all been very helpful. The only other thing I was gonna sort of, circle back to is the number 5. Which I think I heard mentioned a couple of times in various ways, which is to understand and advise on the needs of the community, during emergencies. Now, I'd heard that we maybe wanted to not emphasize the emergency side, but I can see how the overall surveying and understanding the needs of library users in general. So I heard some questions about like surveying people, kind of getting feedback directly from the community about how they use the library now, how they want to use the library in the future. So if there's a general feeling like the emergency piece doesn't need to be as high up in the language here, but maybe use this as more like surveying of general needs.
Yeah, so remember when we had all those storms, was it 2 years ago? I don't remember. I feel like the library or some community center was used as like a shelter for that, where people could charge their phone and get
Yes,
water and things like that. What was that? Bellhaven obviously wasn't open. Do you remember what?
that was here's, this library is a designated cooling center. It's
Okay.
actually a cooling center right now. Believe it or not. It's always a cooling center, and then other times as needed. And then it was a power outage resource center
Got it.
when there were widespread power outages, and I think that was just last year.
Yeah,
A year and a
it's all a
half ago.
blur.
Yeah,
I
so the
do
people, because we
agree,
did
though.
have power when others didn't.
Oh, I see.
So obviously, that's an important thing, whether it belongs in this wording in this work plan is my question.
Yeah, and I agree that I don't think it needs to be this high up. I mean, I think this was probably.
It's a
from
leftover from COVID.
Yeah.
This was definitely a COVID.
Yes,
leftover.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 May I suggest, there may be two, we could organize this to more the operational today issues. Like, I think that emergency is probably important to, and it should be done
Mhm.
maybe
Yeah.
today or soon, in this time frame. And then there's this things we've been talking about is, library of the future, but I think some of these, we could probably knock them off in a few months.
Well, I think they already have emergency.
Certainly,
Procedure.
certainly,
I
yeah,
mean,
I think
they've
this
been
was there
doing it.
because
Yeah.
there was so much attention on it during
Yeah.
COVID in particular.
So what's your thought about, does it make sense to remove it as part of the work plan or just demote it or?
I think it's a question for the commission, like where do you want to focus your advisory kind of attention? Is that high up in the hierarchy compared to other things such as sort of the day-to-day operations, this discussion about education and some of these other sort of library adjacent educational components like the preschools, working with the school district more closely. I mean, some of those things, I kind of hear more often
Yeah.
brought up by the commission, and less so, let's be really prepared for emergencies, which by the way is something that we're kind of already doing.
So
So
that's my.
where you want to spend your time and effort.
I would rather focus on the other things we've been talking
Yeah.
about, since they've
Yeah.
already done this and have this planning and they have systems in place. So to me, I would take it off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm seeing on the website, emergency and disaster preparedness under the city manager's office. So aren't they the ones who figure all of this out in terms of using the facility as a cooling center or charging or this or that? And it's not really, doesn't seem like it's our purview to say, oh, hey, want to make better use of the library, because it seems like it's already sorted out at a different, above our pay grade or by others in the, I guess, police and fire working with city manager's office.
Correct. Emergency response is more central of a focus for the city manager, the police department, the fire district. It's certainly important here, but they're kind of in the lead.
Certainly, as we're no longer in the middle of an emergency situation that is rapidly and constantly changing,
Right,
I think it makes a lot more sense to de-emphasize
yes.
Right.
that part. It's not a thing that needs to be dealt with on a recurring, constant basis.
Right.
Maybe to
Michael?
wrap a little, I think Carol and Sean, you both just used the word focus several times in what your comments were. And I think what we're getting around to is perhaps we see 3 or 4 goals that are bigger picture, and then I feel like we have the very first goal is actually a task we do it's our most important function, right? We provide a forum for public comment, but it doesn't need to be a goal, I think, because simply by holding our meetings, we are achieving our goal, and so like.
I wanna, cause that was the next thing I was gonna bring up, number one. Is I think the reason number one is here is because we spent a good part of last year listening to commentary from members of the community about what to name the Bellhaven Community Campus. And there was a lot of rancor and hurt feelings so I think this was an attempt to make sure that we all had top of mind, to want to be inclusive. Now, next meeting, we'll be talking about what our report out to the city council is gonna be, and I am planning to, with your agreement, give them some feedback about whether we should be put in that position without more guidance, so I would like to see, obviously, we want to be that. We want to behave that way, but it's not really a goal, it's just who we are. So again, I would.
I was gonna kind of say that about number 8. Support the filling of openings in the commission and the effective onboarding of new commissioners. Isn't that like kind of part and parcel of our charter? What we do anyway, whether it's the same as with public comment, is we onboard new people, we follow the Brown Act and, Robert's Rules of Order. And so I would say even strike number 8.
I see, very helpful. So I think as you're probably observing, this is one reason why the work plan's updated every year.
Yeah.
Right, because the priorities, what is a priority for one commission in one year, for all really good reasons, the following year may not be quite as high on the list and other things emerge. So, at the time, that was a very important
Yes.
thing for the commission, and it seems like maybe less so now, and I didn't hear like strong objections to like striking that because it's kind of something you're already doing.
Yeah.
And is 2, because the Bellhaven has been built, is number 2 still relevant, or?
I think the supporting the development part is as we stay involved with the branch of the library that's there. It maybe not the exact same language of like launch of the community center.
I had, futzed around with the language, I'm sure Sean and Nick can do a better job, but it's something that we keep it, and say something like. Review and monitor the scope of library activities and services offered to each community, age group and interest group that use the services at both campuses.
On ongoing.
Including childcare,
basis.
yeah. So I do think that's important, not just for us to look at what's going on at Bellhaven, but also what's going on here, that we want to know what. So I think that number 2, it does need to be updated. But I think that's one of our kind of ongoing.
Yeah, for both,
priorities.
right? So you treat them as one
Yeah,
library system.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and one kind of key element in this that I'd call to attention that maybe does get a little more of the focus is the service integration. Like, the vision for that center is a multi-generational, multi-service facility with all those components are kind of there and they're really tightly integrated. And there's a lot of synergy that kind of comes out of that. And that is where that, as we were mentioning earlier, a major nexus with the Parks and Recreation Commission exists.
it would be nice if that could be kind of the testing ground for that model. That maybe could also be implemented here eventually if it looks like a really productive way to work with the community. So I think we're gonna be really interested to see how that goes.
For example, for 3 years in this very room was the senior center annex. I think we're the only library in the nation that had an active pool table.
I know, where to go.
It's at the new center.
Yeah.
We had senior citizens in there every day using it like it's
Good.
part of the senior center, and
Yeah.
it worked well for that. The new place is better for them, of course.
Yeah.
So there's
So
definitely.
there's
a lot of
no senior
opportunities.
center on this side of town now. Everything's at the Bellhaven. for
Correct. I mean,
seniors.
we certainly have activities and programs for seniors, but but not like a senior center with like a
Right, where
lunch
they eat
program.
lunch,
and-
yeah.
What is Nealon Park? What's the facility in Nealon Park?
That's not part, Little
That's
House.
That's, what is that?
That is a senior center. It's not operated by the city, although the city does own the property, but,
Mhm.
so that's,
It's like a
where,
private foundation or
it's like a
a
nonprofit.
nonprofit
Okay.
that operates it.
But you're saying the city of the future might be a pool hall. You guys had that and you
I think
regret.
some residents who would love that.
Bring the people in.
I'd be down for that.
Yeah.
But the whole, like, what we've all been talking about of, you know, sort of, there's Bellhaven, there's this facility, there's the role of the library in the community, there's the role of building a greater community, you know, between the two campuses. So I think the library commission can play a role in what that future integration and cooperation, and I don't want to use the word integration because a lot of what happens in Bellhaven could be the sort of the center of gravity for a certain service that brings in the other part of town into those activities. So it isn't just like they're two halves of the same, I don't know, you know, whatever, but it's sort of, it's 2 + 2 = 5 or 6 or 7 as we look at the future of what are the two campuses look like, how we work with Parks and Recs. So I don't want to get too over my skis here and in visionary, but I mean, there's a clear role of just, you know, future oversight of, you know, the two campuses and, you know, and planning for the near future, if not, you know, the distant future.
Okay, well, have we given you enough input for the next draft of the?
I think so. It was
Yeah.
really helpful. I think you're up to a really good start.
Yeah, no, really good discussion. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. And so any last words you want to provide on the work plan, or we'll move on to other business? We're good? Okay, I think the next item on regular business is to approve the joint minutes. So we have two sets of minutes, I think, the joint meeting minutes from May 22nd and the April 22 special meeting minutes. We can do both of them together unless somebody has any revisions. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve both of the minutes listed?
I make a motion that we approve both the minutes.
And a second?
You can second.
Okay, co-chair, vice chair, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Voice vote?
Oh, Ashley's gonna take a
Do you
roll
have to
call.
roll call?
Sorry,
Okay.
sorry, Ashley.
So there's a motion on the floor to approve both the May 22nd, 2024 Parks and Rec Commission and Library Joint Commission meeting minutes and the April 22nd special meeting minutes. And Eric, how do you vote?
Yes.
Yes. Horton,
Yes,
Paul,
Oh, yes,
did I pronounce that correctly?
oh, Pollock.
Paul. Schaefer,
Yes.
Westcott,
Yes.
yes, and Wise. Yes, all right, the motion passes unanimously.
okay, so I think now we're on to E2. Assigning library commission members to serve as informational liaisons to library affinity groups. Did you want to make an intro to this, Sean?
Yeah, just
Okay.
really briefly, as stated in the staff report, which I'm looking to right now, there have been, this is not a requirement for the commission to assign liaisons. However, there's value in it. The commission in the past has assigned members to liaise with library affinity groups such as Friends of Menlo Park Library, Menlo Park Library Foundation at various times in the past. That's also included, will not directly supporting the library groups, but adjacent, such as the Menlo Park Historical Association, which has a space in this building. At one point, there was a literacy program, literacy partners, that there was a liaison. So it's kind of varied over the past several years. So I think there was a suggestion that we kind of revisit that practice, and so that's what this item is about. Should the commission and individual members want to fulfill those roles, here's an opportunity to talk about that and to assign people.
I think that we actually did talk about this a little bit at our last meeting because I volunteered to be the liaison with the foundation, the library foundation, and I did go to their last meeting. And I can report on that now or later. There's another agenda item about that, but
Yes.
I do think it's worthwhile. I'm not sure when the meetings are for the Friends of the Library, which also very active organization and very helpful financially to the library. Both organizations are in different ways. So I don't know if anybody, if you want to discuss whether or not it's a good idea, or if you just, somebody wants to volunteer.
I think at the last meeting, we talked about having various folks having picking an affinity and then like being in that role, whether it's attending, it's debatable whether, we're supposed to attend their meetings or they're supposed to attend our meetings, but it's just a general liaison. Like I was thinking, like I'm active with the Safe Routes to School folks and by extension, with the school districts that service Menlo Park. And I could, I would be interested in sort of like doing what I can in a liaison role in that capacity, and whether it's I'm attending all the Safe Routes to School meetings or other activities or events or meet regularly with the principals or not, but just, sort of take on the responsibility of being a liaison between the commission and the school districts.
In connection with library stuff, not,
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
just with as a liaison with the library commission in furtherance of the library commission's interests.
I could just ask for clarification, what in the past was the actual work of the liaison with the library affiliate groups in terms of like what they were actually doing?
Yeah, in the past, it really took the form of like attending the meetings. So like, for example, Chair Horton mentioned the Library Foundation. I think they meet once per month, their board meets. And so like attend their board meeting, listen to the proceedings, offer any information if they want to ask, about like what's the Library Commission doing, they do that, just have that connection and then report back to the commission. I think it typically was the last agenda item, commission reports, that takes place. If there's something more substantial that might be placed on the agenda as its own item. But generally it was attend their meetings, hear what they're doing, establish that connection. Sometimes it evolved into, a representative from the group would come and actually make a presentation to the Library Commission, but that was generally what it's about.
I know that Katie Hadrovich, who was a library commission member for many years, almost, 8 years. She was the prior liaison to the Menlo Park Library Foundation. And she also was a board member of the foundation. And so when I went, that's what they wanted me to do, was to be both a liaison and also on their board. But they're, as I will report more later, they're actively looking for people to be on their board. So I haven't done that yet, but I may, because it's It's a small group and we're all working for the same thing. I don't know when there was a recent, I don't know who has been a liaison with the Friends of the Library, which does all the book sales and has the thing in the basement to sort books. But they provide huge service and they're very active, I know,
And huge funding.
I'd be willing I don't know, Nick, when we went on the tour, I remember him, and then also that meeting in April, he was sort of talking about how they don't necessarily want us putting our nose right in their business, but I would be willing in the coming months to reach out to Nick about two things. One is what sort of liaison support are the Friends looking for? And if I could make that type, I'd consider that. But I also noticed in our policies in charge, you went through, Carol, at the beginning, that coordination with other library
The
systems.
library will be closing in 20 minutes. If you have anything you'd like to check out, please bring it to the front now. The restrooms will be closed in 10 minutes.
But that coordination with other library systems bullet point is important. And I don't think there's anything we can specifically say, oh, we're gonna get involved at something at the San Mateo kind of level, but that might be another liaison thing that we haven't done in the past, because we're
Yeah.
thinking bigger and just for a bigger picture this year. So I would commit to reaching out to Nick or Rose, Nick's not available, both of you, to just get their ideas in the coming month and then maybe come back next month with a volunteer.
the other comment, I don't know what Nick's involvement is with the Friends of Library, but Nick also goes to all of the foundation monthly meetings, so we really have a staff member who's also a liaison, so, but we come at it from different places, so I think that's valuable to have somebody on the commission and also Nick there. Plus they have working meetings 1 or 2 other times a month.
The other aspect of this item, I think it does relate to an item at the end of the agenda, which is the commission reports. And so I think the renewed interest in this item and taking a little more of name some assignments is for commissioners to have something in that section, whether reporting, here's some of the work I've been doing out there. And primarily it's like with those connections was, I think, the idea. So rather than just having it be scattershot, if there was a little bit more of a sort of intentional, one commissioner is really focused on the school district and another's focused on the foundation, then those reports might be a little more robust and
Yeah.
and helpful.
Yeah.
Feed into what we were talking about on sort of a high level about the work plan, about trying to foster more interconnectivity explicitly.
Yeah, good point.
Now, one other group that I failed to mention in my initial kind of rundown is the Parks and Recreation Commission. So it's, obviously it works fairly closely aligned to the Library Commission, so that could take the form of, if not attending the meetings, watching them on Zoom, keeping an eye on the agendas. Staff certainly does that as well, but it is perhaps helpful for
Have they-
commission to commission kind of.
Have they
Connection.
filled all their spots?
I think they had another vacancy, so I think they're also at 6 right now.
Okay, but they did choose a chair.
They have not chosen the chair because they weren't able to meet in April, and we didn't want to do the chair in May, so they're
Oh,
gonna be
okay,
doing
right.
that
Next
next week.
week, okay, so that's what. Yeah. Okay.
But until the point where I should stop banging the drum about cooperation with Parks and Recs, because I might get stuck with responsibility, but I just always want to, and for now, do it through staff, but you're just, not that I'm concerned about stepping on toes or repeating work, but it just seems that, on some activities, the synergies between the two groups and, if we're both backing the same program, like, Brian was saying earlier, then it, has better, sales power behind it that, both commissions are supporting this initiative. So I don't know exactly what I'm referring to right now, but it just seems that there's an opportunity out there to get greater synergies across both commissions.
I think there is, especially, well, they've got pretty much all new people too, and they'll be electing a new chair, so. Maybe we put that on the list as once they get their new organization, we can
Mhm.
try to foster some communication.
But it's important for us to know what we think our charter is before you can liaison.
Yeah.
Exactly. So maybe we focus on next draft of our work
Yeah.
plan. Maybe you could, Michael, do a little research on what's involved with the Friends and maybe if there's any community library organizations that would make sense to liaison with. And I've got the library foundation.
And you said at the beginning, tightening sort of the educational aspect of the library sort of commission's charge, I think will help in defining our relationship to Parks and Rec. So maybe as part of that process in the coming couple of months, we can find some. I think it's unfortunate there's the Menlo, the Atherton Educational Foundation, which is supporting in a certain sense, the Early Childhood Learning Center at Lower Laurel. But I am finding that we maybe need in this community a little bit of an umbrella body foundation like thing for these early childhood services. And that's a broad ambition, but without, a city or a Menlo Park School District thing bringing to the awareness of the community that there's a little bit of coordination that ought to come, that I don't think either of these formal bodies can do. And so that's going a little far afield, but I think it goes to what we were just saying about what's the relationship between supporting after-school programs versus education at all ages? So that's sort of a long-term thinking thing to do, but I think it might need to come from our commission sort of in terms of initiative. So I'm not seeing this community, anyone else sort of looking at this issue carefully.
Okay, so lots of work to do.
So then maybe it sounds like this item's kind of wrapping up. It's not necessary to have like a regular business item for someone to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm gonna go liaise with one of these other organizations and report back. I would maybe just offer that since you do have as a standing agenda item, commissioner reports, that,
Yes,
that could be the time where, like, if at a later point in time, someone's like, I really think it would be good for me to connect with X, just vocalize it during that agenda item. That's perfectly legit under the Brown Act. And then you could sort of informally say, yeah, go for it. Rather than bringing up an agenda item.
I have a quick question. You guys might, I'm sure you've noticed. The whole redevelopment project here, it might be timely if we can start defining this library in the future and there might be opportunities to actually have some kind of influence on the facility or something that could support. I'm posing that as a question. Do you think is that all done or is that still pretty
No,
full?
you're talking about the proposal to redevelop SRI, which is
that whole
referred to as
area.
the Parkline development.
Mhm.
And that's certainly still in the, it's advancing through the process. But it's not being built yet, hasn't been finalized. The planning commission is the primary
Right,
body that.
okay.
So like when we talk about liaising or like at least like looking in on the work of other commissions, that's a good example.
You're right.
For, the commissioner here to kind of like, well, I think I'm gonna take a closer look at this because it's relevant and report it back to the commission and highlight some touch points. It's just an efficient.
The
use
library will be
of time.
closed in
Have
10
one-
minutes. If you're working on a laptop,
one
please start typing
representative
work
go
and
check it out
shutting
and
down.
report back to
The restrooms are now locked.
Right, okay, I'm just,
Yeah.
that's kind of a short-term opportunistic situation.
yeah. Jen Wolfson is on the subcommittee that is working on the negotiations, I think.
Yeah, you can just piggyback and have them build a whole new library. Slip it in.
Well, it's not unusual with some of these major developments that a community amenity is sort of baked into the project plan so that it has better chance of success going through the process. But maybe this is a question for Nick offline, but like what is the relationship currently between say, Nick and the librarians at the elementary schools or at the school district of like sometime, you know, like, oh, we have certain needs and we cannot provide enough of that, you know, in the school district. So it would be great if the library could have more of that, like, you know, like at certain grades, there's always, you know, like, oh, you have to do a biography of someone. So, you know, that part of the library that has all of the biographies of, you know, everyone in the world. You know, I imagine that just sort of came about kind of organically, but if there was ever discussions with the school districts or the school librarians that say, oh, this is how we could get more synergies. Is there-
Well, you know, as luck would have it, our library and community services supervisor, basically the library supervisor, Rose Waldman's here, and I think she could speak briefly to that.
I
of what we're
certainly
doing there.
can.
Maybe step to the podium so we are on the camera that we've got going for the record.
Great.
Sure. So the short answer is yes, we
Mhm.
do have contact with local school librarians. It's been a very strange few years.
Mhm.
And there has been a lot of staff turnover, not just at our library, but in the schools as well. Pretty much anywhere you look, there's been a lot of staff turnover. So a lot of the last couple of years
Mhm.
has been building a strong library staff here and then starting to build the connections with the new staff elsewhere. So we've got a pretty healthy list for the first time in
And
a
hasn't
while.
funding gone down? I don't know these days, but over the last several years, it seemed like the funding for librarians at schools tends to be the first area that they.
That's not my area of expertise.
Okay.
But, you know, I'm not able to give a sufficiently researched answer to that question off the cuff, but, there are still librarians in the schools and we make an effort to reach out to them. We had a pretty successful outreach effort when it came to the poetry voices, this last April. We're working on building those connections. One really pleasing thing that I've noticed in the last couple of years is that in the last year or so, we've been getting a lot of requests from the librarians to come for school visits. And that's something that 2.5 years ago, we were making that outreach and we weren't really getting much back. And so, you know, we had a few very successful visits last year, and this has been the first year that we've started seeing repeat customers, essentially. We've seeing the same teachers coming back and saying, well, we had such a great experience before, we'd love to come back and learn about public libraries. So that's sort of the longer version of the answer, which is, yes, we do. We have a lot of databases, a lot of online resources that are available to the school kids. But we don't get as much of a request for, we just don't have these materials, or we just don't.
The library is now closing.
Don't
Please
worry, it's
exit
not
through
for
the
you.
front door.
We can stay as
The
late
library
as you want.
opens again tomorrow at 12 p.m. Thank you.
The requests are more for the people, the staff as a resource,
Mhm.
the visits, the teaching kids about libraries, then about, you know, we need this book, or we need this database, or can you show my children what an encyclopedia looks like?
Thank you,
Great.
Rose.
Yeah,
Thank you, Rose. I mean, this has been a very interesting kind of wide-ranging discussion, but I'm trying to figure out if we, is there anything to vote on, or did we need public comment on this, or was it more just,
Oh, I think we want to take public comment
Yeah.
in case.
we kind of went a little out of order? Sorry about that, Ashley.
Is it fine with you if I call for it now?
Yes, please.
At this time, if you'd like to make a public comment on this item, please notify the staff liaison by using the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're dialing in, you can use the *9 function to engage the raise hand feature. No, we don't have any public.
So I'm not clear on whether we need to have a motion for this. Is it a?
You don't, there's not a
formal policy?
requirement, and I think, just to reiterate something I suggested earlier, the commissioner reports section of the agenda, at any point in time, you know, one or more of you could raise your hand and say, I went to this or that. Affinity group, here's my report out, or to raise your hand and say, I'm really interested in this one, and I'm gonna start that connection. So there's not really a need for another
Okay.
agenda item.
Okay, yeah, I think it's been
Or are we
working. pretty-
even formalizing the roles that, you know, we're all saying, oh, yeah, well, we're gonna try to reach out to this group or that group, but no one is, it's not written in stone or.
Right, but it's gonna, every month, that general item will be on there for people to report out if they have things to report back on their research or their attendance. Okay. All right, let's see where we are. I think the next item is E3, library meeting room use policy. There's a staff report on this, but should we start, Ashley, with getting public comment?
At this time, if you'd like to make a public comment on this item, please notify the staff liaison by using the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're dialing in, you can use *9 to engage the raise hand function. There are no public comments. Up to you.
Did you want to make any?
I can do a quick overview. This was just with the staff report. Periodically, we bring policies to the commission. This is revising an existing policy that was last updated and not too long ago. It was actually updated last year. But because the new facility is open, there are two spaces in there, in particular, a tutor room and a conference room that previously it wasn't really spelled out what were the criteria for public use of those rooms. And so it seemed like there was a need to really make that a little more explicit for users of the facility. And while we were at it, since there is a room in this building as well, the learning lab, that we add those details here too. And so with that, I'll just kind of stop and see if there's any questions. We would like, if all of this seems agreeable to the commission, a recommendation and a vote to recommend it.
Yeah.
As you can see, I'm showing the red line version, kind of just showing the changes to the previous policy. There's also a clean version afterwards. And yeah, if there's any comments or questions, happy to.
Any comments or questions?
There's sort of a separate, more, Robert's Rules of Order, / Brown Act question. So what I'm used to, and the Library Commission isn't in the same concerns that there's, say, via the Planning Commission or City Council, but it's usually sort of like staff gives their report on a subject. The members of the commission ask sort of like general, like clarifying questions. Then it's open to public comment, and then the commissioners discuss it and then vote on it. So it seems a little bit different order, or is it because of different the nature of the agenda items in this?
Yeah, there's not really a set order. The order you described typically is what's taken for an item that is robust enough to kind of require a lot like that sequencing of, let's get a presentation. It's a subject that requires a level of presentation beyond what's written in the staff report. Maybe members of the
The
audience.
new
are
bicycle
interested in.
lane and like, so you have to take-
Yeah, so to have sort of like a sort of a staging of the different elements of the discussion. And in the case this evening, there are no attendees right now. The items are kind of self-explanatory in the report, so they're kind of put on screen. So it's really kind of at the discretion of the chair, kind of what order they go, as long as we make sure that we're opening the public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
Would a commissioner like to make a motion to approve the revised library meeting room use policy?
I make a motion to approve.
And would a commissioner like to second?
I'll second.
Okay.
Weston.
Ashley, roll call vote?
Okay, there's a motion on the floor to approve the library meeting room use policy. And Commissioner Head, how do you vote?
Approve.
Chair Orton,
Approve.
Commissioner Ford?
Approve.
Commissioner Schaefer? And Commissioner Westcott
Approve.
and Vice Chair Wise. Approved. Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
We're now on item F, informational items. Informational items are transmitted to the Library Commission staff to provide an update on matters of importance to the commission. Informational items are not action items. However, a commissioner, city staff member, or a member of the public may request to make a comment or ask a question on any of the informational items. And the first informational item is Library and Community Services Department updates, staff report that's attached.
If I could make a suggestion through the chair, informational items are really for information only, and we don't necessarily always do a presentation around those items. And then we're just sort of like available if there are questions about them, or if they prompt a desire to have a more robust, like an actual regular business or action item in a future meeting, totally can do that. And from the standpoint of like taking public comment, it's also perfectly okay to just take comment on all of the informational items in a group, and to also take any questions on the items as a group.
And that's how I would like to proceed, is to have Ashley ask for public comment on all the informational items as a group.
At this time, if you would like to make a public comment on any of the informational items, that would be item F1 or F2. Please notify the staff liaison by using the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're dialing in, you can use *9 to engage the raise hand function. There's no public comment.
All right. Would anybody like to ask any questions or make any comments about either the updates with the statistics attached? Maybe we can talk separately about the proposed agenda dates.
My eyes glaze over when I look at numbers, so.
My only comment is I appreciate that you provide these. It's interesting to look at the changes, the different, how they've gone up and down year to year, month to month. But other than that, I don't have any questions, but anybody else?
I just have a very small question on the table dealing with like circulation. I'm just curious, under like the circulation per capita per borrower and per visit, there isn't any data for 2022 to 2023. Is that just not being compiled yet, or was there something else going on?
You're on attachment D.
Sorry,
Are you on F?
Background on that.
attachment B.
Yeah, I do have some background on that. So we actually do provide those numbers to the state. And as I was gathering them, the state didn't publish them yet. So I was like, that's okay, I'll produce them myself. And then realized I'm not sure really what numbers they use when they create their formulas, so if they're taking total circulation, including electronic or not. So those are the ones that we just had hit a stalemate on, and we didn't have a formula. We didn't want to use a formula for this go round that was going to be different than previous ones. So I just put that little asterisk saying that we're going to make it available as soon as it is.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on that staff report?
What, this doesn't have to be long. On the total circulation attachment fee, there's 1 year there that is double. 2015 to 2016 is over $1 million.
Yes, now, and these are the stats that are compiled by the state library. And if I'm recalling correctly, you can see down below under physical item circulation, it's about 8 rows down there.
Right.
See, they were like not available in the prior years.
Got it.
And then they started kind of tracking them separately. And I believe there's some kind of like, the data spike is related to that.
Got it.
So I
Makes
recall we
sense.
last looked at that, they changed how they collect the data.
I will just say it is very encouraging to see on almost most fronts, like attendance and circulation, everything increasing across the months and years. That is very nice to see.
Mhm.
With the exception of 2020.
Yeah,
That's a blur
happening.
for all of us.
All right, any comments on the tentative agenda schedule? The one thing I want people to note, even though it's not one of our meetings, is when I am to make the report to the city council is in August.
Oh, well,
Right.
so, yes, August 13th, it's actually listed here. If you
Okay,
look
there
at
we
the
go,
roll for
August
July,
13th, yes,
right now we
yes.
have it.
So I have that on my calendar and we'll talk about it at the next meeting. But then it goes to city council by the end of the month or by the end of September. The actual work plan, do we have to be
Yes.
there or is it on a consent calendar?
Not
Yeah.
necessarily, and I believe it's usually on the consent calendar, and in the past few years, they've actually done kind of a bundle where a number of the commissions, all the work plans are together in the same item.
Okay,
Because the city council will have just heard
yeah. they
the
just had a
verbal
report.
reports like
Yeah.
in the weeks prior.
Yeah, okay. And I know that the September 16th meeting, I am gonna be out of the country, so I know I talked with Jennifer and she is gonna chair the September 16th meeting. Okay. All right, any other questions or comments on the tentative calendar? All
Can
right,
I make one thing? Traditionally, the library commission will occasionally have a meeting at the Bellhaven location. So I know you just had one there last month. But we haven't identified a month, maybe, to do it a couple times a year. So you don't have to do it tonight, but maybe just give some thought. Is there a specific time where, you want to flip one of these over to the Bellhaven Community Campus?
well, if next month we're getting the report on the Bellhaven campus, which maybe next month would be a good month to be over there.
Does that work for everyone? Okay, great. Yeah, perfect. Got it, got it. We'll be there next month.
Now we're on to commissioner reports. And I would like to make a short report out on my attendance at the Menlo Park Library Foundation. So the most important thing for you to know is that they are very much in the same wavelength as the discussion we were having in our work plan. They gave a big donation, $300,000 or so to fund purchasing books for the new Bellhaven children's library. I think it was just for the children. Was it for both?
Those books,
It was for
equipment, furniture
books.
for the whole
Books.
library.
So now they're kind of regrouping and a couple things. They are actively looking for new members to join their board. So any of you know anybody interested yourself, one meeting a month, small, relatively financial contribution, but really more brain power, interested in getting people from different parts of our community. So that is a big need of theirs and they're focusing on that. And the second thing is that they really want to coordinate with us in, and library staff in identifying projects that will motivate them and their donors. They want more than, we're looking for some more, but I mean, they had focused on Bellhaven. Now they're ready to look, they're looking for vision, they're looking for excitement, whatever. So I think it dovetails really nicely with the discussion that we had today. And so we'll just keep those discussions going. And if any of you know anybody or are interested yourself, or, I don't think there's any reason why one couldn't be on both the commission and the foundation, other than if there are more multiple commission members, you just have to make sure not to Brown Act anything, you know, have any, so I don't know. So, you know, I can put people in touch with some of the board members. They're very nice and thoughtful group who have been at this a long time and know a lot more about the history and workings of what's been going on in the library system than I do. So if you guys have any questions about that. And it is definitely a very separate focus and personality to the organization than the Friends of the Library. So.
Would definitely be interested in going, but
Yes, yeah, okay. Anybody else have any report outs on their activities?
I just really appreciated, Nick's efforts around, the Bike to the Library event, in conjunction with Bike to Everywhere, to Bike to Work Day, which is sort of a national event, and, the turnout, among students was just phenomenal, and community organizations and county organizations, and like a bike rodeo with like Live in Peace, was it? They came out and helped on that front. It was just really impressive. It led me to bug Nick about getting a community bike ride going sometime this summer. A lot of people are away, but we are planning a bike ride around town between the two library branches and stopping at some of the little libraries along the way. All the commissioners will be invited. No Brown Act violation because we'll all be on our separate bicycles, families
Just
involved.
don't have
and-
four on the same bicycle, because that's
Right.
wrong.
Okay, there you go. And then, unless we call it emergency, meeting ahead of time. But, we'll get the, police department involved and, council members. I don't know how many people are still gonna be, in town, whatever day we plan it, but.
So
I'm
you don't have a
looking-
date yet?
Don't have a date yet, nail it down soon, but might be the first library sanctioned or sponsored bike ride in a long time, but I'm hoping to have a lot more of these types of rides in the future.
Great, great. The other thing is I encourage you all to attend the various library functions. I think it'd be great for us all to know what's going on, and they can do a good job if you sign up for the updates. Also sign up for the summer reading program. There's a cool little app and you get a free book there at the front when you sign up. And fun way to participate in some of the library activities. Any other ones you want to pitch, Rose?
Say hi to the library staff,
Yeah.
introduce yourselves.
Yeah.
I am so happy to see that there are some folks who have some library background. You've got a wealth of library information professionals working here, and we love our industry. We have a passion for it. So I'm very much looking forward to bringing reports to you. I've been making notes.
Great.
Got lots to bring to Sean. But introduce yourselves, ask questions. Questions are our bread and butter.
Good. All right, anything else before I bang the gavel? All right, meeting is adjourned at 8:16. Thank you
Thanks,
all very
everybody.
much.